Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another episode here of GameSense. We're all happy to be here, and we would like to thank you guys for watching this great evening. Before we get things started, though, we want to thank GameSense's sponsor. They're Symbotic. They give us the tools that we need to do all the cool stuff that we do here. So if you get a chance, check them out on Google. First off, I'd like to introduce everybody else here with me. I'm Francis O'Rourke. Behind the scenes today is Stephanie Morrison. She's doing the direction. Here on screen with me today are our wonderful hosts. We've got Evan Morrison, Ty Tremblay, Naveed Shaffa, and our guest for this week, Gabe Salas from the Pink Team, and you may have also seen him on the Robo Show at the at the Orlando Regional. Gabe, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thank you. I just want to thank you guys for the opportunity to speak with you guys today. I started my rookie year in 2002, Zone Zeal, and have been a student and now a mentor with 233, continue supporting them. Just want to let you know my experience recently has been helping out with Robot in 3 Days with the original crew, as well as hosting the Robo Show in Orlando. Lately I've been working around as a consultant, helping out with other teams locally in the area, and just love doing this, so can't get away from it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us this evening, taking time out of your busy day to help us out. So, before we get started, we'll just go over a quick few things. At the end of the show, we're going to have a 20 or 30-minute Q&A with all of the hosts and with Gabe. If you have questions for us that you want us to answer live on air, you can send them to our bot, our chat bot. It's GS bot. Just type in !Q followed by your question, and that'll give us the answer. Or you could tweet it to us with hashtag Gabe's Beard. This week is actually. So go ahead and tweet us with that, and we'll see what happens. Just a quick disclaimer. We don't take ourselves too seriously, and we hope that you don't either. So if you think that we were wrong in something we said, we want you to go out there and prove us wrong next week. So this evening, we'll be covering the changing face of the Recycle Rush game, what exactly is happening during autonomous mode, and of course, everyone's favorite food, cheesecake. Not corn dogs, cheesecake. All right, first though, let's get some initial impressions from everybody here about the week that was, week 3. So let's start off with Gabe. Gabe, give us your rundown of what you saw this past week.
Basically, covered all of the Orlando Regional, and I'm still trying to catch up to figure out what's going on with all the other regionals for week 3. My take was primarily a lot of teams are having trouble with staying consistent with their game format. And so what I mean by that is a lot of teams have a hard time being able to stick with the plan and also figure out exactly what to do in case the plan doesn't stick. And so with a lot of that is when you see a stack fumble or topple or they miss picking up that green container, many teams have a hard time rebounding or communicating behind the glass, which I think is very critical.
All right, awesome. Evan, what do you have for this week?
One thing I noticed, I had the pleasure of watching the Australia regional webcast, which was a phenomenal webcast, by the way. And I saw that even when you're not at the high power events, you can still have really exciting eliminations, or playoffs, I should say. Those final matches going to 3 between probably the best rookie we've seen in years, 46-13, and 359, the Hawaiian kids on the other side, their first time not on the number 1 alliance in a very long time. Really, really close. And Australia, you crazy. This was what's shown on the screen now was actually in the slide deck for the regional. So, Australia FRC, where the robots aren't the most dangerous thing in the pit. But boy, they sure looked like they were having a good time down there.
Awesome. Ty, what's your take?
Well, I spent my time at the UMass Dartmouth event, which was actually a really small event. Only had 27 teams, and 24 make it to the eliminations. So those last few picks were really stressful, and trying to figure out which of these teams was hard. And actually, it was pretty interesting to see how the dynamic changes when you have to actually dip into that bottom percentile where you can't really take the top 56% of the field. You have to take the top 80-something or 90-something percent.
Cool. All right, Naveed, why don't you finish off our quick recap of week 3?
Sure. I caught some of Australia too, at least the semifinals and finals, and that was a lot of fun to watch, especially because of the way the alliances were working together. And one thing that I think we're starting to see more of now is, although the alliance felt like they're working together a fair amount, there's still not quite as much interaction as there used to be as far as completing each other's stacks. It's more of people seeming to be doing their own kind of thing now. Definitely saw that a lot out where we were this weekend at Mount Vernon. And the finals out there, great. Semifinals, even more intense. Qualification averages for both teams of 144 points at one point. Was a lot of fun.
Nice. Well, my quick take on week 3 is that in the eliminations, if this wasn't apparent already, you can't leave cans on the floor. You got to stack them, even if it's just on a 2-stack, a 1-stack, whatever you do. If you got a can, you got to put it up, because really, if you're not on those high power alliances, getting 4 or 5 cans on stacks is what's going to be able to get you out to victory. We'll see how that changes with the rest of the week. But let's transition over to taking a look at the top performances from this past week. Evan, take us away.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we saw a number of teams going through their second playthrough, and a handful of our of the annual powerhouses coming out for the first time. A lot of strong performances. I want to highlight a couple of them. 1519 Mechanical Mayhem came out week 1 and won their first event. But they looked really strong at a very deep field in Dartmouth this weekend, and put up what is now the second highest qualification average in the world of 139 points. So that's only about 3 points behind 1114. They were doing it through all means necessary, autonomous, co-op, and stacking. I think they had 10 out of 12 co-ops. So just phenomenal all-around play, and they managed to get out of there with a win at a really tough event as well. 2056 OP Robotics playing their first time. A lot of people weren't sure what to expect. Some people have heard some rumors that they maybe had a little bit of a rough build season, but it didn't really show. They went out there and rocked the field, and they might not be quite as flashy as 1114, but they came out and they came to play and put up some really big scores. So it'll be fun to see them and how they improve next week at Waterloo. 330 came out for the first time with a very unique machine, as is their custom, and just rocked Los Angeles. They partnered up with 973, who completely rebuilt their robot and just improved the heck out of that machine. And they walked away with that regional. And then there's Utah. And I think we've got a little bit of a graphic here, but if you weren't watching Utah, and I saw a couple of the qual scores coming in, and I actually went and pulled up the live stream to verify that there weren't issues with the API publishing incorrect match data. The number 8 seed at this event, at any other event this weekend, would have been at least 5 or 6, and with a qual average of 89.8. At 13 out of the 18 events this weekend, that was good enough for 3rd seed or better. And then you say, well, but look at their co-op scores. It was so high, everybody was co-oping, which we'll get to later and whether that's going to be a trend or not. But then you go into their playoff scores. The average playoff score overall in Utah was 131.4. Quarterfinals, average playoff score 113.8. Semifinals, 140.9. Average score in finals was 173.
Damn.
Okay? The lowest score by any alliance in both finals matches was 164 points. Okay, if you don't think that's competitive, I don't know what is. I think this was by far the hardest event to lock down of any that we've seen so far, including Dallas. And I'm really curious. I mean, 624 came out after having won the Dallas Regional Week 1, and they got out of there with the win, but I don't think it was quite as clean as they were hoping. So,
sort of just out of curiosity, why does anybody know why this was Utah is historically not put up scores this high? What's making it different? Was it the teams that visited? Did they step up their game? What was it? Naveed, go ahead.
They've got some strong teams there, but it certainly helps when you've got 624, I believe GRT 192 was up there. Taters 2122, that right there, 3 big names coming in from outside of the region to help them put up scores. And Another big one that hasn't had the time to shine recently is 1619, I believe, up Creek Robotics. Can't believe this is going to be their first time moving on.
Yeah, and 1619 has actually been really in the thick of it the last couple years.
Yeah.
662 also came out really strong this year, and we've got some video showing right now of semifinals in Utah with 1619 playing. I mean, to give you an idea of just how strong of a field this was, 43-34 Alberta Tech Alliance was the number 24 pick. And this wasn't a team that we've seen a couple is like, how did that alliance get put together? Well, they were having some problems. No, I mean, they worked. Everybody else was that good. And I think that kind of brings in, for a lot of teams, this was also their first event, which is impressive. I think 624 was one of the few coming in with previous experience. And that's, I think, really what set it apart for me. And it was not just the scores, but also the fact that it was the first event, because and I think maybe we'll move on a little bit here, but there's been drastic improvements from teams event to event, 624 included there. So to see all these teams come out so strong is a little bit of an anomaly.
Yeah. Actually, but real quick, Gabe, why don't you tell us a little bit about, we know we had a bunch of really like powerhouse teams coming up in Florida. Why don't you tell us a little about what happened there? I know you were deep in thought the whole weekend on the Robo show, so.
Yeah, definitely. Just real quick, you mind if I talk a little bit more about Utah? I'm actually curious. Yeah, definitely, because I've been reading more about the teams and looking more of the alliance pairings and stuff like that, and all of them seem to be regionally close together with the alliance picking. So was there a collaboration with the teams in Utah, with engineers, or also with resources or allocation of like supplies? Because I'm really interested to know, because I think there's something else going on behind the scenes with that regional, why they have such high scores. Because it can't be too much in competition or teams, just communicating behind the glass. There's some other factor being played to this regional, because it's above and beyond all the other regionals nationwide. So something has to be explained there, and I'm actually more curious about that myself.
Well, if anybody knows, send us a question. We'll be happy to air it up afterward. But anybody got any thoughts? Cheesecake? Yeah, right.
Well, one thing you've probably noticed over the years is that a regional with 3 or 4 top-ranked teams in past games, or those really big powerhouse teams, they can put up these huge scores. Get a ton of frisbees in, get a bunch of 3-cycle assists. Where with this game, based on the scores we're seeing, if you can put up, if you're a robot that can put up 1 or 2 stacks of 4 with a container on the top, and you get 3 or 2 of those together in an alliance, you're going to be putting up some pretty big scores. So I'm not saying this is the case, but maybe there was a chance that all of the whole playing field of Utah was elevated that much higher, and there were still those elite teams, but also the basic robots at Utah could also put up a stack or 2.
Yeah, that's a good theory.
It's very possible, because even looking at the graphic before, in Orlando's, you would be ranked number 5th, from the top 8 with that score. There's lots of rooms for improvement, at that regional, and there's still some teams that this is their second regional. So it explains why, the scoring was so high at the Orlando regional, but like mentioned before, at Utah, for a lot of these teams, this is their first regional, and they still have above and beyond when it comes to scoring. So there's some other factor, I believe, involved with the scoring in Utah, how crazy it is. And I love to see that. I want to see action, be able to see high scores for every match. And now I think for next year, we're going to have a lot of eyes pointing to Utah, and a lot of big names want to get a piece of that action.
Yeah. I mean, I know that any region or any group of teams gets boosted up when everybody gets better.
Mm-hmm.
As people learn more and share more and are willing to help each other out, things get better. And look at places like Minnesota showing up big scores. They've been sort of, I don't want to say insular, but Minnesota is kind of this black box that exists that we're not quite sure what's going on. They sort of do their own thing, make their own regionals, have them across the street from each other, and they're all geographically close together. So we'll see. Anyway, let's take a look around. We've sort of been touching on this earlier. Ty, why don't you lead us off and talk about how teams are changing the robots for the game this year as the season progresses.
Did we lose Ty?
Maybe.
Yes, I'm muted. That's what you get for trying to blow your nose on camera. First of all, thank you, Francis, for giving me this cold. Second of all, I'd like to paint two stories for you here. We've got 1519, who competed in their second event, and we've got 973, who competed in their second event. 1519 won in their first event, put up some pretty respectable scores. I think they had an average of 90 or over 100, and picked a good capper, and off they went. 973 didn't do so hot. I think they went out in the quarterfinals, if I remember correctly, and they decided to rebuild. 1519 only changed one thing. They fixed how they pick up containers, and then came in, did the same thing, 3-toed auto, went in, put the co-op on, and then made a couple stacks with caps on them and called it a day. 973 completely rebuilt their robot, as in like saw 1114 and was like, oh, that's how you're supposed to do it, and then rebuilt their whole robot. But both came across with wins. So I'd like to kick off the conversation of teams that improved on their second week and why we think 1519 and 973 both had success with such different approaches.
I don't know if I can speak so much to 1519 versus 973 improvements, but I definitely want to touch on an improvement that we saw out here. And I know Evan's not gonna toot the horn yet, but it has to happen. 1983 goes out week 1, wins an event by putting up 2 5-stacks with cans. Did that pretty consistently. Got some extra totes out there too. But Mount Vernon this weekend able to put up full 6 stacks and still sometimes had time to put up a few more totes, even an additional few more totes with a can on top. And I think a lot of that can be attributed to the work with the can stabilizer.
Yeah, I'll speak to that a little bit. Mostly, we just focused on improving the reliability, the functionality that we had week 1 at Auburn Mountain View. We had issues with the can stabilizer in several ways, just requiring too much precision with our can pickup. And we had some issues with the can pickup itself. And then you saw that if you were watching towards the end, actually on Saturday, we debuted the ability to put up stacks of 6 with the can on top. And that was something that was a little bit nerve-wracking for us, because if we don't do it right, there is a chance for us to break the robot. So we were practicing a new method of loading that allowed us to do that, and then pulled that out on Saturday. So for us, it was all about just improving a couple of little things to increase our consistency. But it also can't be ignored that across the board at the entire event, there was improvement, which really elevated the play. I was absolutely blown away at how much better everybody had gotten in 2 weeks. CPR 3663 is one of the up-and-coming teams in the Pacific Northwest, and they were good week 1 in being able to put up a 6-stack with a can pretty reliably, and they came out at Mount Vernon with the ability to do 2 stacks of 6 with a can when they're firing on all cylinders, and they were doing that quite frequently. And so, definitely a shout out to them and a host of other teams. Sonic Squirrels 2930 also. Just practice and improvement on the little things really makes a world of difference. And that contrasts to 973, who recognized that they had some fundamental flaws with their design at Inland Empire week 1, and decided to rework the entire thing. And this is a group of people that works harder than pretty much anybody that I know to come up with a complete rebuild, and it works. It's just a phenomenal robot.
Yeah, they're not the only ones to have rebuilt the robot either. I know Spectrum very recently also did a major redesign of the robot after what was going down. So, Gabe, I lost the call for a second there. I really want to hear your thoughts on the Orlando stuff, because I wasn't there, and I missed the Robo show this year, which I regretted. But I want to hear what you have to say.
Actually, to speak about the Robo Show, we expect most of the people to watch after the weekend.
Oh, okay.
This weekend we had, I think, 220, unique hits
Uh-huh.
during the show, which is actually, I think, double from last year, which is pretty
Nice.
good.
Very good.
But most of the traffics as of yesterday, I think we hit over 2,000, I think 2,002 or 2,500 hits already. So we know that
Awesome.
a lot of people are coming back from these events and watching our show, which is great to see and hear. And I don't have the data in front of me up to date, but that's that. Orlando as a whole has been a really great regional this year, and primarily because of how many unique teams from out of state and even country visited our regional. We had teams from Germany, from Turkey, um, Brazil, Puerto Rico, just to name a few, and several teams from out of state as well, including California, Georgia, Mississippi, um, Pennsylvania, to name a few. We had to sing, I think, 4 or 5 different national anthems each morning. So it was definitely wild, but it was great to see the different flavors try to get a little piece of the action in Florida and really add variety. So this year in particular was very different compared to other years before. I thoroughly enjoyed the competition level of play. For example, Team 3646 Integra, they're all the way from Turkey. They were the first team on practice, came with a robot out the box, and created a full 6-stack with a green container on top. First thing they did, the first thing
Wow.
to do it that morning on Thursday. So props to them. They were very good, during finals. And I don't know if they qualified for World Championship yet. They did really well. And Orlando was the only regional that they signed up for. So if you were to give a wild card out, please give it to that team. I think they deserve it, and they'll do real awesome at championship. And I think they'll really appreciate it. So hopefully we'll be able to see them there. But as a whole, the regional was solid. I can't speak enough about it. It's very memorable. Is there anything in particular you want me to touch base on with each of the teams? I mean, I don't want to dominate the conversation just Orlando. And so,
Well, how about there are a lot of how many teams there were at multiple regionals this year? Anybody else like show any big improvement from their previous outings? Maybe like Spam. I know they had some issues going into the other's Florida regional.
yes, they had some issues. They were able to resolve the majority of them. Their last qualifying match, they were a little bit shaky, touch and go, and surprisingly enough, they didn't get selected for eliminations, and that was
Oh
the
wow.
biggest shock. So we covered a little bit of that in the Robo Show, trying to understand why they weren't selected. Considering the way that the alliance pickings were going, I felt that the number 1 seed alliance should have picked them, mostly because they were a great counter to the 2nd seed alliance against 744 Shark Attack. Their primary objective was to get the center green containers from the barrier, and Spam had a mechanism that would be able to grab it faster than Shark Attack. So with that concept alone, I was a little bit floored that they weren't picked for a lot of other reasons too. So that was the biggest shock. But as far as teams with improvement, Spam has improved marginally, especially with Talayap. Being able to manipulate, they have these 2 arms. They're able to pick up 2 toads side by side, move in the scoring position, and stack them, and continue stacking 2 toads at the same time, creating 2 stacks side by side. And they were able to manipulate the green container rather better than they did in South Florida. In South Florida, it wasn't super critical to be very good with the green containers. It was very important for Orlando. And so we saw a lot of specialists on being able to index and manipulate the green container, including 1592, who was also in South Florida, Moose, which is 1065, same thing, 1251, who were the specialists. They primarily focused on the green container, and they were the best at the regional, and being able to deploy it with the fastest time as well and the most ease. And the Ninjaneers actually improved on their autonomous, which helped them win the South Florida regional. And so it helped them carry over that point difference over to finals. And they were the only team with a very consistent autonomous. And so because of that, they were seated very comfortably in the top 8. Whereas other teams kind of ignored autonomous or only had something basic to position them into a position. So with that, I think moving forward with championship and also regionals in the future, autonomous is going to be a major factor, especially with positioning before teleop.
Yeah, and actually, it's kind of interesting you say that because that's kind of something I want to talk about today as well. Um, it seems like autonomous mode is in this kind of strange place right now in the game. On one hand, we have a lot of teams that do really well with like the three totes and get those reasonably consistently. Some of them do, some of them don't. And we have these oddball autonomous modes like 330 that get the three containers in autonomous mode. But especially at like qualification level, it seems like there are a lot of teams that or a lot of alliances that don't get any autonomous points. It seems like for the vast majority of matches, autonomous points aren't scored. And it's mostly because to me, it seems like mostly because one or two robots aren't able to do exactly what they need. Like maybe somebody's pushing a tote, or somebody's moving a container, or somebody's setting up at the human player station, or somebody forgot to put the robot the right way, or what have you. What don't, like I don't know what to say about autonomous mode because it seems like it's in this weird spot where it can be super powerful if you do it well, but there's so many different variables that can occur. I'm not sure if a lot of teams have figured that out yet.
I think some of it's skewed actually because we might see it as okay, this alliance doesn't have what they need to make that autonomous come together. But sometimes, if you've got all of those pieces separate, a lot of teams, I know for one, we did it at week 1. Why not opt to be right in front of the loading station if you know that that's going to benefit you more if you can't guarantee you're going to get those auto points? And I think we've seen a lot of teams that really focus on what can we do that's going to help us best for teleop because there's just way too much to rely on, even in a best case scenario, that you're going to get those points.
I think so too, and a lot of it is positioning on the field. A lot of people don't want to interfere and get in each other's way, which is very important. And we noticed is the alliances that were really good in sectioning off, all right, you take care of the landfill, we'll take care of this home unit loading zone, and you take care of the other side of the field, and kind of stay in each other's quadrant. They end up excelling really well and communicating very effectively instead of having to cross-pollinate between different sides of the field and waste time traveling back and forth. In regards to autonomous, I think there's a fear in being able to interfere with another team's play. We're not sure exactly where they're going to end up at the end of autonomous. So I think a lot of it is just like, all right, let's play it safe. Let's not move. Or if you do move, only transition between one part of the field to the other, and that's it. And just stop. Don't do anything else.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it is that it's just not worth it for a lot of teams to even bother trying. I mean, I've seen teams tip themselves over in autonomous on accident. Like, stuff goes wrong, your robot can break. There's always a risk in autonomous of something just going horribly wrong. And to get all three robots to move, or I should say to get all robots that are on the field to move into the auto zone, because it's interesting the way that the rules read, that if you only have two robots that are on your alliance on the field, and you move both robots into the auto zone, that's 4 points, because it's all robots on the alliance, and we've seen that a couple times, but really, it's 4 points. Right, which in the grand scheme of things isn't that much. The containers, that's 8 points, but that's a lot harder to do. I mean, that's almost as hard to get as the auto tote set. And the risk there is that a lot of teams struggle with containers that are knocked over, right? So there's a lot of risk involved in just messing up the game pieces. So I think that's a lot of it, is that the risk versus reward just isn't there unless you are able to guarantee that your robot can do a full, auto tote stack or set, or even more, and get some points out of it.
Yeah, I think this is the hardest auto that has ever been created by First.
Ooh, bold statement.
2007 was hard, but one robot could accomplish it, right? Like, you could get points for one robot doing a thing. And here, the only way to get points for one robot doing a thing is for that one robot to get all three of one or both of the game pieces on the field. And, I mean, we've seen not even 11-14s pulling this thing off every time. And 11, teams like 1114 and 2056 were able to get all 4 of their frisbees in, or they were able to get two balls in last year, but having to go around these containers and pick up your totes and stack them and index them correctly. If these things are off an inch in either way, that they don't stack right, and it's just, this is the hardest auto ever created. And to be honest,
you would know personally.
Yes, from 319. Speaking of which, 319's code has suddenly disappeared, so we get to rewrite the whole auto again in 2 days. But
Hooray!
the point is, I think it's a combination of really hard and not worth that many points. In a game where to win finals you're putting up, 150 to 200 points, 20 points isn't really going to get you there that much further if you can get them out of the way, get your cans ready, and start stacking.
And if you don't get it, if you dump those totes, then they're in the way too. I mean, on top of it not being worth the risk versus reward scenario, you're actually becoming a detriment to your alliance if you don't make it sometimes.
Well, and if you don't get it, there's also a higher chance that your alliance isn't going to be able to get co-op if that's your thing. If you go try and do your tote stack and the whole thing just topples over, there's very few robots out there that can pick up a sideways tote properly and go put it on the co-op platform. So, right there, if your strategy relies on getting those those 20 or 40 points from the center, maybe you're better off not trying for it.
Yeah.
And I think it's.
Go ahead, Evan. Sorry.
I was gonna say, a lot of the teams that are doing the auto tote stack are not going for co-op. They're actually either not able to do it or they just don't find it worth their time. They make the set, they put it in the corner, and if somebody wants to try and go get it and make a stack with it, great. But we see 1114, 67. 2056 was kind of the exception there, that they would actually try for it, and I think 1519 as well. But
1519 tries for it, but to be honest, they sometimes spend so much time reacquiring that stack. They're one of those teams that picks up each tote individually. They can often spend so much time reacquiring the stack that they could make another stack of 4. Granted, they wouldn't have the container to put on top of it or they might not have the container to put on top of it, so it's kind of a toss. But they take those 40 points and they took it all the way to the win. So
yeah, and actually, really quick, Ty, it's interesting you bring up 2007 because if you look at, let's just say, Einstein finals, just not that anybody here is super familiar with those matches, but if you look at those matches. Only two out of the 6 robots on that on those alliances went for the autonomous goal, and that's because that goal is super. Like you exactly were saying, it was so difficult, and it was not worth that many points in the long run. That the cost benefit analysis just wasn't there. I know that, when on 190, our world championship winning autonomous mode was to drive backward for 2 seconds and do nothing. So, hopefully that changes before we get to this Einstein this year, but we'll see.
I mean, I think we've seen enough teams that can successfully do it that it will definitely be a key factor on all of the Einstein alliances. But to talk a little bit about that 2007 auto, the fact of the matter is that what you were doing in auto in 2007, it didn't matter if you failed, really. Right? They would actually stop the match if it was going to be an impedance and cut the tube off and take it off the field. But the objects that you were scoring in auto literally could not be scored after auto. So there was very little risk to it. There just may not have been a very big reward. And so there were a couple teams that were kind of 50-50 on doing it. 233 was pretty good at it. Our partners 987 were pretty good at it. And I think each of us got one of them on Einstein finals. Yeah. But it was like in the grand scheme of things, it wasn't that big make or break it. So, it was less of a risk, I think, than this year, where you could really screw up a lot of your teleop plan just by messing up auto. Yeah,
that's true. All right, well, we'll switch gears a little bit right now. Our friend our friend and mysterious benefactor, Looking Forward, has blessed us with another video this week. This week, it's about ramps and how they play in this game. Not 2007 style ramps, 2015 ramps. So we'll see how that plays out in their video this week.
Loading robots and entering game pieces into play has been a default role of human players for almost every game in the past decade, but never before has it been as difficult as Recycle Rush. Some teams have integrated their solutions to the problem into their initial design, but many others had to adapt their strategies to accommodate. Using yellow totes as seeds to start stacks has been a popular solution on the field, but more and more teams are beginning to tether passive ramp devices to the robot to ensure game pieces enter play in the proper orientation. Even top-level teams have used ramps, however they sometimes tether theirs to alliance partners. Ramps range from the improvised, such as the totes of 610 and 708, to the engineered, such as the fold-down contraptions of 1114 and 2056 that bypass the bottleneck of the chute door. The popularity of ramps exploded in Week 3, and don't expect it to slow anytime soon.
And I'm muted. All right. And yeah, okay. So
Greetings.
Looking Forward, he brings up some really good points in that video. And that sort of brings us to our next topic, which involves our good friend Cheesecake and the ramps that they are. Naveed, why don't you talk a little bit, just real quick, give a little background on what this whole thing is about and sort of where the issue this week came from.
Sure. So we had our guest last week, Brandon Hawley, came on, and he talked about this process that 125 had coined as a term, where you provide some sort of part or assembly and work with a team to put it on their robot to help your alliance in eliminations or this year playoffs. And by helping to modify that robot, you allow a team which might not have otherwise be able to provide a significant impact to your alliance. And as it got discussed more last week in a Q&A question, actually got posted and then answered, Q&A 461, there were some pretty serious implications about that. And it has since been rectified, but the original Q&A ruling meant that things such as loaning another team a battery with leads on them, transmissions that had already been installed and assembled, pneumatics with fittings already on them, motor controllers with leads, all sorts of kind of things like that. And if you go take a look at it, I recommend reading that thread, The Dangerous Precedent Set by Q&A 461, led off by Corey from 254. And it's well over 200 posts now.
There's a lot of stuff on Cheap Delphi. Just be careful.
This was actually one of the best threads that I've read in a long time.
Yeah.
There was really good discussion on there.
Yeah.
And to give a little bit of background here, the whole thing stemmed from various interpretations of, I believe it's R1, R14, and R17 in the robot rules, which basically states that the parts that are used on that are legal to use on a particular robot, fabricated components which are legal to use on a particular robot, have to be from their bag or their withholding allowance. And so what that meant was common practices that we've seen in previous years of teams, loaning spare parts to each other, or even just giving it to them or installing them on robots, wasn't legal by the letter of the rules, but by gracious professionalism and what that entails and doing your best to try and get everybody to work their best and be able to compete, really kind of encourages that. And the wording of those particular rules actually stretches back, including 2011, when there were specific awards basically given to an encouragement to share mini-bots. And a lot of mini-bots themselves weren't compatible with other mini-bot launchers, so then you had teams retrofitting mini-bot launchers and things. And so this year, it kind of got brought to light that maybe this isn't legal in the rules. And we've had different interpretations at various events where I know at Dallas and at Central Valley, the plan was basically teams would come with stock materials and build accessories for their partners at the event. So the components were fabricated at the event.
Let's accessorize.
Yeah, no, literally, right? And whereas we saw at Waterloo, and 1114 had the capability of doing this, of building a new ramp for their partners from stock material at the event. But they checked with the robot inspectors and the head referee, and they said, no, you're allowed to go take your ramp and tether it to another robot as long as they're inspected and fit in all the robot rules and stuff with it. And so there was a lot of questions about whether this was really legal or not. And then the Q&A got posted, and the initial response was, no, it's not legal. You're actually not allowed to ever loan any parts to that you've made that the other team didn't help make. And so then you get to where Naveed's talking about, like, you can't even loan pre-assembled VexPro gearboxes with motors attached.
Yeah. I think that this sort of shows that, like, I think first intent is maybe it's up to opinion whether or not it's a good idea or not, but I think that their intent was pure, but their execution was suboptimal for sure. Like, whether or not, we can talk about this too, whether or not giving somebody a ramp, tying a rope to it, and telling them to not move is a good or bad thing for First as a whole. That's one thing or another. And I would assume that First was kind of thinking, man, maybe this isn't the best thing. But it's unfortunate that they kind of just basically typed it out wrong, you know?
I mean, even in the finals in Orlando, over lunch, we saw one team. First of all, it was Pie Day, so Comcast was nice enough to give all the teams a large pizza pie. And then Domino's threw in more pizzas for all the teams. So over lunch, one of the teams actually took the cardboard boxes from these pizzas and literally created a ramp that was tethered to their robot.
With their sponsor on it.
With their sponsor on it. Yes.
Baked oven fresh.
It was amusing and funny and very effective. So to talk about cheesecaking in that fashion, I mean, yeah, it was created at the event, I mean, through lunch and discussion. So for me, I thought it was ingenuous. I thought it increased the level of play. And if it's going to allow modular parts and pieces to be fitted in mind with other teams to be able to assimilate, I think that's ingenuitive, creative, and I think it should be encouraged within the community. So with that said, I mean, if it's going to provide better matches, I'm all for it. That's my opinion. But like Francis said, the execution, perhaps even the wording, might have needed to be clarified. And I'm sort of glad that this discussion is taking place, especially in Chief Delphi.
Yeah, that's true. So, I mean, I think another question to sort of bring up is in past years like 2011, giving somebody a mini bot is just basically a strictly advantageous thing, right? That's you can't really say that the robot's only getting better by helping them to launch mini bots and score more points more easily, right? I know Ty's got some opinions on this, right? But Ty, what are your thoughts on sort of like ramps on strings and the ramifications of that with the game?
Well, ramps on strings, that's tough, right? Because you pick last year and for many years before, you picked your third team because you felt that they could help the alliance the best. And this year, you run the risk of picking your third team because they're the clay, because they're the easiest robot to turn into the robot that you want. And while some teams might love that, like, yeah, sure, cheesecake us, this would be awesome. There's cheesecaking and letting them become more competitive, and then there's you are a battery and a controller, and you will sit there and you will have your ramp. So I think they're all legal and they're all okay, and if it's going to happen, it's going to happen. But from a karma and a feeling good about myself kind of standpoint, I don't know how I'd feel about picking a third partner that would sit in the corner.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. And I think that's where a lot of this is stemming from, right? Is that it feels fundamentally different, even though from the legality point of the rules, it's identical to what we've seen in previous years. And it's just it's a function of the game, right? It's a function of a lot of things about the game. One of which is the fact that these transportation config rules exist, right? That allow that kind of creativity and outside of the box solution. The other is that there's resource limitations on the field, which can reasonably be capped by two very good robots. There's an inherent risk of putting that third robot in a role that could potentially interact with the other two robots, just in terms of maneuvering around the field and costing time, or knocking over a stack and costing matches. And lastly, this is a game in which just having a good drive base doesn't contribute anything to an alliance, right? And those in concert are the crux of the issue, right? In previous years, if you didn't have a deep field where you'd come back around and there was somebody that had a working mechanism, you picked a drive base, you had them run defense, and you were good, right? And they were contributing something to the alliance just on the basis of they had a robot that moved. This year, you have to have a mechanism on the robot that works in order to be able to contribute something to the alliance. And by the time you get back around, especially at smaller events, those robots sometimes just plain don't exist, right? That's an option. But more importantly, the way that the game plays out with the other two robots and their ability to maximize scores in this game is, from their perspective, they want a robot that will enable them to reach their potential. Right. And that's not necessarily meaning picking the next robot that can do something, right? Sometimes that means picking a drive base that has the right space and weight left to put an alternative mechanism on. And the fact of the matter is that these quote-unquote mechanisms are so easy and simple to put on, whether it's a can burglar or a ramp, that it has almost nothing to do with what that robot actually was designed to do in the first place.
All right. So, crazy idea. And I want you guys to chime in. 254, you could say that a significant portion of them winning champs and making it to 10-0 on their field was their ability to go 2 or 3 matches ahead and work with their alliance partners and get them to the point where they can handle a ball and they know the strategy and they can practice passing off. Could you say that this, now that it's explicitly legal, could you say that there's a team that walks around with this incredibly light 16th inch Lexan or acrylic or something ramp, and they say, here's your team, here's your ramp, here's a rope, here's how to use it, and we want you to leave this ramp here and just help us in every single match. What are your thoughts on that?
It's legal.
Naveed, what are your thoughts? I see the smoke coming out of your ears. So
yeah. I think the big problem is I'm not against it, but like Ty said earlier, it does feel a little bit funny. I think the idea of cheesecaking has the ability to be incredibly inspiring, and some of my favorite stories that I've experienced or been around, it has made some of those teams experience, and it is what has driven them to become the team they are today. So I really can't knock the cheesecake. But on the other hand, some of these kinds of applications of it, is it that exciting? I mean, winning a blue banner, awesome. I mean, I think a lot of people would be willing to sacrifice a lot for that on the field for it at the end of the day. But if it was up to me, I'd like to be able to feel like I am personally making an impact on the match rather than I am existing, therefore I am helping you be better at what you do.
That's the big difference for me, right? That's the big difference is that in 2013 with the shot blockers and in 2014, right, you go put this on, you're not taking away from what that robot was already intended to do, and they're playing a vital role in the match strategy by actively doing something, right? If you put an intake on a robot last year and said, here's how you're going to use this to inbound, and they're inbounding, right? They're generating 20 points for your alliance by and actively participating, and it wasn't necessarily a something that you were going to go, take off after the match. And I don't know if teams are
Yeah.
going to take things off after the match this year or not, right? But in 2013, you actually had to drive and maintain your position and not get fouls with a shot blocker. So
Mm-hmm.
that's where the difference is coming in for a lot of people, and that's why it feels different. Is that it was what used to be helping a team actually be better at playing the game, right? Is now helping a team be better at sitting in the corner and letting other teams be better. Basically, it's just it's weird and it's hard to quantify.
Right. I do have to agree with Evan a lot. It's really tough for teams to spend 6 weeks building this robot to move and manipulate the game pieces out in the field. And then to be told that they were going to get in the way and to sit there is not very inspiring. However, what other alternative do you have in a game where there's no active defense being played? The only defense that's being played, the only enemies on the field are your alliance partners and those totes.
And the noodles.
That's it. And the noodles, yes. The
Oh
litter.
god, the noodles.
They do get annoying. I've seen great human players throw the litter directly on robots and see a team struggle getting it out of the robot is hilarious, but also saddening that that's all it takes to shut down a team. But it's cool. The thing is, because the way the game is designed makes it very difficult for 3 teams out in the field to be very proactive in executing all these stacks in concert, especially with how tight the scoring platforms are in maneuvering with the landfill and to coincide with everything there. So if you are to adjust your perspective and say, hey, by avoiding getting in each other's ways and staying put and actively being an awesome ramp bot or basically creating stacks to give to another team where you could just stay on one side of the field, if that's what it takes to make the other 2 robots awesome and support them in cheesecaking in this fashion, then that team needs to eat some humble pie because they're going to get a blue banner if they do this. So if you're able to convince teams to not carry out their primary function that they hope for the robot to do to get to finals, that's fine. But the thing is, they carried out that function throughout all of qualifying to get them to position to look pretty to be selected by one of those top 8. So yes, you did your job as a robot. You fulfilled your primary objective for that team and for that robot during qualifying. Eliminations is a totally different game. It requires you to sit there and look pretty. If that's what it is, hey, I don't want to encourage it, but if that's what it takes to win, I'm willing to bite the bullet and swallow my pride for that. So sure,
I would
I'll
too.
do it.
Yeah, it's true. And I think not to trivialize the great insight you had there, but kind of what Evan, you were saying is don't hate the player, hate the game.
Yeah.
Yep.
What you gonna do?
I mean, look at it. If you're gonna sit there and be the tree in a play and just stand there, you don't feel like you're actively doing anything, but you tie the whole scene together. You're gonna sit there and be a tree. Then do it. Do your job.
You'd be the best darn tree that this middle school player has ever seen.
A cheesecake tree, even.
A cheesecake tree, yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Decorate it, throw LED lights on it. You're gonna be pretty. Let's do this.
That's true. All right. Well, I think that's a great discussion. I'm sure there'll be more to be had on Chief Delphi for approximately ever on this subject. So, it'd be cool to see how it goes. All right. So let's transition away from the week that was and go into what's coming up in week 4 and how we think the game's going to progress as we go into the hump week, basically, of the season. Gabe, talk to us about what your thoughts are.
What I hope to see with week 4 is to see more automation come into play. And I think with that, you're going to see a lot of teams very timid to bring out, their equipment or the right stuff to bring on the autonomous. I think a lot of teams are reserving that for championships with good reason. But it comes down to, have you qualified for championships yet? If the answer is yes, then, no worries. Don't bring out the big guns. Improve on teleop, improve on the things that you need for your robot. But if you need to bring out teleop or, something to manipulate the force of game with the green containers in the center of the barrier, then you're going to want to pull those stuff out to seed and qualify. So I'm hoping to see more autonomous play a bigger factor with this game, even though we've mentioned earlier that it's such a huge risk with not so much of a payout at the end. But I'm only saying this purely because I like to see variety and something new. And I think a lot of teams are going to be wanting to test that out when it comes to week 4. So I think that's going to be the biggest strategy change between week 3 and week 4.
That's good. And even hopefully I like to see some autonomous modes or folks who maybe their autonomous mode was just to drive into the middle zone, drive into the auto zone, maybe think more critically about what that autonomous mode's actually getting them and think about trying to pick up totes from the landfill or getting ready to pick up totes from the center station, or even maybe in qualification matches not playing with the yellow totes. That's an option as well.
Yeah, I think teams are starting to realize that you don't have to have the auto totes on the field, and ramps happen, and then you can easily make a stack of 3 and throw it on the cooperation. I mean, relatively easily. So I think one thing we'll see in week 4 is more teams that realize, okay, we're not going to get the auto points, so let's just take them off the field, we'll load them into our ramp, and we'll go through them on there, and we'll get 40 points faster than we would even if we did get the auto points.
Yeah. What are you guys thinking about for cooperation? I know that in a lot of teams, especially earlier on this season, have been using cooperation to carry them up to the top rankings. Is that going to continue? Is that going to start to wane? What are you guys thinking?
I think it's going to wane. I'm only saying this because in the beginning of qualifying, it's going to be critical. Come late Friday, Saturday, you're going to see teams going to say it's more advantageous for us to prevent, 5 other teams to rise up in the ranks with us and only allow our 2 alliance partners to kind of rise up and increase in ranking. So I think you're going to see that more strategy revolving with not cooperating in the middle.
Ooh, interesting. The old bridge tipping of years past, perhaps, maybe?
Yes, exactly that.
Boy.
Yeah.
I know some teams are even removing their capability of being able to co-op, and it's kind of nice when you can say, sorry, I can't really do it, versus, yeah, I probably can do it, but I know I would be better off doing my own thing, or I could attempt it, and then I waste your time and my time.
Yeah.
I think we're going to see it start. I agree with Gabe. I think we're going to start seeing it wane a little bit.
Yeah.
Primarily because the really high-power teams can just score. They can score more points just by scoring points. And so even the ones that are doing the auto tote stack are most likely and usually leaving that there. And if somebody else can go make a co-op, they can. But it's a useful thing to have one of your alliance partners, or both of them sometimes, go do if you're a high-powered team. And I think that in itself is enough to make it fall out of favor a little bit.
But what about if you're not a high power team like most of us? What if you're sort of in the middle? Is that you think that's gonna make a difference?
I think if people do their scouting properly, they would know how that team could fill your alliance's role, and I think that's the bread and butter to scouting. You can't really just look at ranking and say, well, this team is really good in tie-up and this one's really good with the container. You have to see what mechanism they excel at implementing to your current alliance selection. So there's more food for thought when it comes to picking and what style of robot you're looking at.
That's true. All right, cool. Anybody else got any last thoughts about what we're going to see in this next week?
I'll add one thing really quick, and I promise it'll be really quick. I think we're really going to start seeing the resource limitations coming into play with the cans. I think as we progress in the season, more and more cans are getting used, and you're going to start seeing teams separate themselves by having the ability to give their alliance access to those additional cans.
All right, cool. Well, that's bringing us toward the end of our show now. So let's do the thing we always end our show on is shout-outs. So Ty, give us your first shout-outs for this week coming up.
And all of first have the ability to team up at an event. We've got 3310, who's got this ridiculous 4 degree of freedom arm that makes stacks like a processing plant. It's incredible. And we've got the Hand of God on 179 that is proving to be an incredibly effective container manipulator, provided they keep their wheels on the ground. So I want 3310 and 179 to team up and make 1,000 stacks and break the world record and stack it all the way to the sky.
To the moon. All right, cool. Evan, Evan, give us your shout-outs.
All right. I only got one today. This goes out to 1658, the Tech Heads in St. Louis. The past couple years, they've built really simple, somewhat janky-looking robots that work phenomenally well. They've posted some footage of their practice a couple weeks ago, and it just looks like an amazing machine. I think they're going to have a great event. So I'm pulling for you guys. Go Tech Heads.
Nice. Naveed, hit us up with your fresh takes.
All right, Pacific Northwest shout out of the week, 3663 CPR. Got to give it to them. They've been working hard the last few years, and it's crazy for me to believe that they still don't have a banner yet. I feel it. This week, this is the one. And then I want to give a shout out to 5495, probably my favorite rookie team this year, the Illuminati. They really got it right. They have a capability to stack totes, and they could put a few up if they need to, but their beauty really comes in the fact that they've got a great can manipulator. And they go over, they do what their partners need them to do. They go put a noodle in it. They stand aside if they have to get ready after a stack gets up. I've seen them make some really nice clutch plays, and that robot will go far. They picked up a rookie all-star already, semifinal showing at their first event. I expect them to do well this week and moving forward.
Nice. All right. Well, I have a request from our director, Stephanie. She wants a shout-out this week to Team 971, Spartan Robotics from out in California. They're probably one of the biggest teams that we haven't seen yet, and they don't have a reveal video out. They don't have any pictures out as of now, so we don't know what kind of crazy concoction machine they're going to put out. Well, no, I don't know. I haven't seen anything.
I will say, it's crazy.
All right. Well,
it's crazy.
We expect nothing less.
It has a refrigerator on it, right? Or is that a mini fridge?
Yeah, no, it actually has a refrigerator on it.
Wow, that's pretty good. So my shout-outs for the week, big shout-out to Team 20, the Rocketeers from Clifton Park, New York. You and your about 1 billion people that sit in the stands. They're going to the Tech Valley Regional. Want to see how well you guys are doing. We miss you up here in New England and hope you come back for Battle Cry. Other big shout-out in the Northeast is 319, that's Ty's team. I'm only shouting him out because they have one of the most coolest autonomous modes in New England for sure. Craziest, with all sorts of cans and totes and everything going everywhere all at once. And it's good to see 319 sort of over the last 2 or 3 years rise up and become a real contender in New England. So big ups to those guys.
One of the
all
most
right, Gabe.
auto modes.
Yes, one of the most auto modes. All right, Gabe, take us home for the episode. Who are your shout-outs for this week?
My biggest shout out is going to be for Team 2826 Wave Robotics. They released their teaser a few days ago, and I came back from work really late, checked my normal email, pulled up this video, and was floored at their autonomous. Absolutely impressed. So it's going to be awesome seeing these guys in action later this week.
Cool. Well, that brings us to the end of the show. Excuse me. Sorry about that. That brings us to the end of the show. To all the viewers out at home, thank you for watching. But stay tuned if you're watching live, because we're going to have our Q&A session right after this. We're going to take a 5-minute break, and then we'll be right back with Q&A. If you have questions for us, type into the Twitch chat !Q followed by your question, and our Twitch chat bot will automatically pull it in, or tweet it to GameSense at FRC GameSense with the hashtag Gabe'sBeard, and we'll get that as well. But before we break here, I want to give another big shout to Gabe. Gabe, thank you so much for being on the show with us this week. And I'd just like to say that when we were coming up with GameSense, we looked at RoboShow and saw what you guys did, and we saw how awesome it was, and that was one of our inspirations for doing what we do here. So it's great to have you here, and great to see your insight this week.
I'm very flattered to hear that, and it's a pleasure to be with you guys. It was a lot of fun to hang out with.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. Anyway, we're going to go dark for a few minutes. If you're watching on YouTube, thanks for watching. If you're watching live, we'll see you real soon. Bye-bye now, everybody.